centimeters, 10 foot 5 degrees.
These testing projects are of interest to our scientific investigators across Canada, and it makes them a better investigator and provides them with the ability to go to court and say to a court, I've been there, I've done it, and the court recognizes the fact that they're not book read, that they've actually conducted the testing and been exposed to what happened here and what the results were.
The RCMP are doing a reconstruction course up at the airport. They approached the fire departments, Terrace and Kitimat and Thornhill, to offer a bunch of cars an opportunity for us to practice our skills with auto extrication. And it's a live scenario, like you see with the car behind me. That's after going 80 kilometers and crashing. So it is a true representation of some of the scenarios we deal with for the fire department. You know, obviously, you know, it's a paved road, everything like that, it's nice, but it's great for our members to practice.
Everybody's been, you know, enthusiastic right from day one to be involved with this. There was no hesitation from any of the departments. They knew how valuable this training was going to be. They knew exactly what would come out of it. So, yeah, everybody's been on board and working together to make it successful.
The vehicles have been provided by owners who have written them off. Most of them have come through the local towing facility. The vehicles had to be prepared for the testing. The venue here in Terrace is the Terrace Airport, so you can appreciate that they didn't want to have a lot of vehicle debris, vehicle liquid debris, glass and whatnot on the runway, considering we are testing 32 vehicles. So each vehicle has been prepared by taking out the windows. The fluids have been taken out of the vehicles, so the vehicles are not dispersing coolant and rad fluid and transmission fluid onto the runway. So we prepared them that way. Some of the vehicles we put dummies in them, and we've done a number of exercises where we've had multiple dummies. Some of them are wearing seat belts and some of them aren't. And this provides an added advantage to the testing project in that we're able to monitor the occupant kinetics in a crash. We're able to see what's happening with their arms flailing about, what movement they have within the vehicle, and in cases where they're not belted, how they're coming out.
Right now we're installing cameras, little mini cameras inside the occupant space of the vehicle. We turn these cameras on just prior to the vehicle going down the runway here, and what that allows us to see is what happens with the occupants during the rollover sequence.
We wanted to make sure that we were capturing as many angles of the actual testing as we could. So we've mounted cameras on the platform itself, and these are small, high-definition cameras, as well as one on the hood of the truck that's delivering the car. It's sitting up on the left side of the hood, and you'll see there's one on the back of the tow truck as well on the right side, capturing a couple of different angles on how the vehicle is deployed, what's happening when it's going down the runway, and what happens after it's been deployed. All of those different perspectives form part of the scientific analysis later for us to prepare the report that will ultimately say whether or not we were able to validate the formula used to calculate the speeds of tumbling vehicles.
The footage that we have is going to be around for years to come. We're hoping that the data that we've collected will assist us in our investigations, in crash investigation. But not only that, we're going to be able to show people, if you're not wearing your seatbelt, what's going to happen to you if you come out of the vehicle. We have all kinds of footage now to be able to put something together to educate the people on seatbelt usage. It's not just about us going out and writing speeding tickets. We have to educate the public, and with what we have here, we will be able to educate them on this issue.
What we end up doing is we'll get a call for an MVI, whatever it may be, wherever it may be, outside of Kitimat or in Kitimat, and even in Terrace in that matter if it's to the point where they need to call us. So what we do is we send 2 guys out in the ambulance. They respond first, and our rescue truck will follow with them, and then I'll follow as well as deputy chief. I'll follow them out as well. We pull up on scene. We do an outer survey of it. We look for hazards. We look for potential issues that might be as we approach the scene. We got our patient in the vehicle here, one of our own guys. We put him in there. Now these guys they're doing their circles, they're doing their in or outer, they're checking for leaks, they're checking for gas, they're checking for patients, how many there are. They're making sure that the scene is safe for everybody to work in, and we're not going to cause any more damage or any more issues with it. So 2 eyes are always better than one. Basically these are the attendants, the paramedics that show up first. They're making their decisions, they're deeming what they have and dealing with what they got.
We had instances where the vehicle would catch on the bottom of the table, and the table had a tendency to roll over top of the vehicle. These modifications have eliminated that problem.
So here we're setting up a staging area. All the tools that we're using, that we could use or we may need, we always have one area that they go to. That way you don't have tools spread across, your whole work area. If you're looking for a tool, you know exactly where to go to get it. Our 2 medics are dealing with the patients, and now we got a crew coming in and they're stabilizing that car. So they're putting the blocking in the car, making sure that the car doesn't move. It stays in its spot, so when we do start working on it, it doesn't cause any more harm to both the patient and the rescuers that are helping. They're working on a 4-point stabilizing, and once they get that done, the car it's not going to move. It won't go anywhere for them. Stabilizing is an ongoing thing for them. It has to be checked. It has to be rechecked every so often. It's once you start taking parts off the car, once you start removing vehicle parts, the car gets lighter, the car will start to move, the suspension that's absorbing the weight of the car right now. Once you pull a door off, that weight causes that suspension to come up. Going to start pulling doors. They're going to gain access to the patient by removing the car. We don't remove the patient from the car, we remove the car from the patient. So what's happening right now is they're getting ready, they're covering the patient up just so any debris, glass or anything like that that's left in there isn't going to get covered all over and going to get into his eyes or any other open wounds that he might have. So right now, as you can see, they're going to make a purchase point for that door. They're going to remove the passenger door from it. Once they remove the passenger door, it's going to make access a little bit better to the patient, and they can start reevaluating what they need to do after that point.
Initially last year we did some testing with the table. We rolled 12 cars to see if the table was going to work, to see if the overall project feasibility was there to provide us with the data that we wanted. That testing revealed that we had some modifications to make to the table, and one of the things we looked at is we put on the flaps on the front that allows the vehicle to come off and actually lift the flap, and the vehicle doesn't get hung up on the table. We had instances where the vehicle would catch on the bottom of the table, and the table had a tendency to roll over top, or the table had a tendency to roll over top of the vehicle. These modifications have eliminated that problem. So modifications were made to the table, modifications were made somewhat to the testing, and today we have a testing program where our project where we have 32 vehicles that are going to be tested so in a manner that we've designed. On top of changing the design of the table, we added Teflon to the upper portion, and what that does is it allows the vehicle to slide off. The table has been designed that it can move at an angle. We can adjust the angle of the table at any angle we want, up to 17 degrees. If we adjust that angle, it allows the vehicle to slide off easier, or it may take a little more to get it off the table. What this does is it allows us to adjust the angle, record it, and document everything we have on the table before we launch the vehicle. So what we're doing at this point in the project is we're loading a vehicle onto the ramp. We have John Lemoyne with the Commercial Vehicle Safety Unit here in Terrace. He's knowledgeable and enforces the vehicle defects, so he's able to make sure the vehicles are okay. He's also able to give us a hand with any issues we have with the table or the tow truck in the event that there's a safety matter that should be looked at. Right now what we do is we have a tow truck here that's pulling the vehicle onto the test table at 90 degrees. The car is not functional, as I said. We've taken all the fluids out of the motor, so we can't start it up. So the vehicle is pulled onto the table. Pronto Towing has got a couple of their units here. They've been instrumental in putting this project together because they've donated the trucks and their employees to make this happen. We have the vehicle secured to the table now. The emergency brake's on. It can't move side to side. We've got the chain hooked up to the frame so the vehicle can't slide off the table prematurely. The pin is locked in here, and what it does is it secures the vehicle from sliding off the table until we push the pin. Once the pin is pushed, the vehicle's released, and now this vehicle can slide off the table, and it's no longer secured to the table. So in this case, we've got the vehicle set at 10.5 degrees. It's going to come off the table. We're also interested in how high the deck is off the ground. The vehicle has to drop that distance from the deck to the asphalt in order for it to roll, and we want to know what effect that height will have on the speed that's calculated at the opposite end. So we're measuring the height of the deck, we measure the angle of the deck, and that becomes part of the overall testing data collection.
So they're breaking the hinges off the front of the door right now. So it does get quite violent sometimes, but the whole idea is to make sure that car is stable and it doesn't move it as little as possible.
One of the things that we looked at last year when we were looking at the testing project and what we could do with this testing project, when we did the 12 vehicles, we noticed that we could test on asphalt and we could test for vehicles that are rolling in the grass. But this year, one of the automotive engineers asked about the ability to have a car impact a pole, a rock cut, or concrete jersey walls. And in this case, what we did is we installed a hydro pole at the end of the runway, and this vehicle actually rolled into a hydro pole, which sometimes happens in real-life crashes.
The community of Terrace stepped up. They donated a hydro pole for us. We mounted it in just in behind me here on the far side, right at the transition point between the asphalt and the grass there. And we put some vehicles into that as well.
What we also did is we put dummies in the car and we belted them. And what this did is it provided us an enormous amount of data with respect to a vehicle tumbling and going into a pole, particularly when we had 3 occupants in this vehicle and they were all belted in the crash. Yeah, you can take a look. You can see that all 3 occupants are buckled. They got their seat belts on. So again, showing that nobody came out of the car, and we don't have anybody who's been ejected and sustained serious injury in the ejection. We may have injuries from the pole here, but we have the person in the back and the driver who are both buckled, still in their positions, and may have avoided injury, and we're not ejected. So it worked very well. People don't understand that even 1 or 2 Gs, which is essentially you take your body weight and you multiply it by the G number, and that's the force that you have to restrain yourself with. So even at 5 Gs, if you weigh 200 pounds, that's a 1,000-pound force that you have to be able to control. And most people can't. Well, nobody can. So even a minor accident is going to create a lot of damage and injury for the occupants. As you may have seen, occupants can be ejected without seat belts, and it's pretty obvious when you start looking at the acceleration traces why that happens. And it just proves that you've got to wear your seat belt. There was a camera installed on this car when it was rolled, and it did capture the movement of all 3 occupants in the vehicle as it rolled. And you can see here where we had the impact with the pole and the striations along the top from when it rolled. So for our investigators, what it does is it provides them an idea of some of the damage that they might look at, how that damage may affect the occupants in the vehicle, and what to look for on a passenger who was in a vehicle and involved in this type of crash, because the inside camera caught all of the occupant kinetics and what was happening inside the vehicle with the occupants while this vehicle rolled and then collided into the pole.
The hydropole is going to especially be able to see it firsthand. Unfortunately, we go to a lot of crashes where vehicles hit poles. It's never a very good ending. We're going to be able to see how it hits. The car is going to be rigged up with forces and meters, so we're going to be able to test and see that. And then we're also going to be able to extricate on those vehicles as well. This
type of crash is again, never been done before. It's a first time in the world that we have vehicles rolling into stationary objects. And as I said, we're pioneering in the field of crash investigation when we start doing this stuff, but it's a learning process, and it's something that'll make our investigators that much better.
The occupant was wearing a seat belt, so in order to obviously remove any parts of the vehicle from around him, he has to be completely detached from the car. So seat belts holding him into place, remove the seat belt, and it gives him a bit of movement free from the car. So they put in some hard protection, we call it, and that's what we have. It's basically, it's a half-inch chunk of plywood that we slide in between the car and the patient. So wherever we're working on, we put a piece. Just when you start disentangling a car, the metal, it moves, and sometimes it's, you can't control exactly where you want it to go. So we put a piece of hard protection in just so a chunk of metal or something can't go into the patient, and it just protects him. They're using the jaws of life through this. These are called a spreader, and they are just as they sound. They spread, they maneuver the metal of the vehicle. So they're breaking the hinges off the front of the door right now. So it does get quite violent sometimes, but the whole idea is to make sure that car is stable and it doesn't move it as little as possible anyway. We got an RIC, so he's watching, and constantly there's different scenarios going through his head. So if the guys come back and tell him that this isn't working, this scenario's not working, he'll have a second idea already in line, and he'll guide them into what he wants done next. The incident commander never tells them how to do their job. He tells them what he wants done, and they go and do it. There, the door's removed. We gain a little more access to the patient again, but because we're pretty worried about spinal precautions, they're gonna do what they need to do to keep that spinal aligned and not getting compromised at all. When you remove a front windshield, there's little shards of glass, and the last thing you want to do is breathe those in, so we make sure our guys have got a mask on, and you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but there's little glass dust, and it's the last thing we want is that stuff getting into your lungs. So it's the other reason why we're covering our patient and the medic that's inside the car with the patient is keeping these glass shards off them and just trying to protect them as much as we can. And like I said, we got guys constantly going around the car, making sure that stabilizing is solid, make sure that car is still not going to move. Is that better? Still on that soft stuff like that. So the saw that he's using to cut this glass, it is a specialized saw. You just can't grab any old saw and think it's going to cut the glass. It is designed specifically for what he's doing right now. It has no other use other than to cut the front windshield out of a vehicle. If the airbag hasn't deployed inside of a vehicle, to us it's still considered live, so it's still in there, it's still putting our guys vulnerable to it. Now what they're doing is they're gaining access to the front of this car. 100% of the newer cars nowadays, but probably 95% of the cars that we're going to deal with in this aspect are going to have an airbag system, a restraint system of some sort. If the airbag hasn't deployed inside of a vehicle, to us it's still considered live. So what that means, the accident hasn't deployed it, the accident hasn't made that airbag come out, so it's still in there, it's still putting our guys vulnerable to it. So when we're starting to work around it, we want to eliminate that hazard. The only way you can eliminate an airbag hazard is by cutting the power to it. So when they gain access to the hood, they'll disconnect the battery. From there, that being said, it isn't always a done deal. Every car is different. Every car has an elapsed time for their systems. We take it out, we have a computer system in our rescue trucks that tells us this type of vehicle has an X amount of time before that airbag is completely disabled. So of course we'll know that on scene. We'll have that information brought up for us by our dispatcher. They will let us know that you have a 5-minute window before that airbag is completely disabled, or a 2-minute window. It depends on the vehicle. When you cut one post, you're never really sure how it's going to react. If it's going to react violently, if it's going to spring in or going to spring out. So to cut these, again, that's where the hard protection comes in, and that other set of eyes that's working with the guy that's running the tool is, it's a communication process, it's a teamwork process, and without that you won't be a very efficient fire hall at all.
So we're heading down to the end of the runway here. We're going to get set up, get all the cameras ready to go and everybody in position. Safety is paramount when you're doing dynamic tests like this. There's lots of forces involved.
We have investigators that are going to be monitoring and taking photographs. We want to make sure that nobody gets hurt in these tests. At the end of the day, everybody has to go home. But you'll see that we move most of the people over to the opposite side, away from the testing area. And only those that are documenting the test should be on the side that the test is being conducted.
S23, vehicle 22, 10-4.
This is our first test of the morning. What's going to happen is we have the unit canal coming down the runway. We have some cones set up at 1-meter increments along the road so that we can monitor when the vehicle strikes in the videos. The vehicle is going to come down the runway at as fast as he can in speeds close to 80 to 85 kilometers per hour. The vehicle at the opposite end of the runway, the gray vehicle, is monitoring the tow truck in radar, and that'll provide us with the speed of the vehicle as it hits the runway. That's the validation we're looking for when we look at the evidence, and we know the speed of the vehicle, so what does it take to calculate that speed? So the vehicle will be deposited on the roadway here. Our teams are set up. Each team has got a task. We have a photography team, we have a measuring team, a surveying team, and a vehicle documentation team that are looking at the damage to the vehicle. Once all that's collected, then we'll move on to the next test. You have to keep in mind that normally, in regular circumstances, that data would be collected by one person, whereas in this field, we have teams of people that are doing it, which shortens that investigative time. In other words, we've got guys in teams coming out and hitting the scene all at once, and they'll be about a half an hour to 45 minutes dealing with the vehicle. In real life, we have one scientific investigator on the scene, one collision reconstructionist, and he has to do all of this himself. And therein lies the problem, and why the highway is closed for 4, 5, 6 hours, is because he's on his own with little help, not like we have here today. The operator will release the chain and allow the vehicle to come off. The vehicle tumbles. The tow truck pulls away to the left as it decelerates and moves away from the test vehicle.
So now what's happening is the test vehicle is moving towards us here. It's right in line with where it wants to deposit the test vehicle, and myself and my partner over here are running the radar, and we're going to get a speed as the vehicle comes off the deck.
He's going to try and get up to 80 to 85 kilometers per hour, and as he comes into the test area where the cones are here, the operator will release the chain and allow the vehicle to come off. The vehicle tumbles. So we have the vehicle is tumbled forward, the tow truck pulls away to the left as it decelerates and moves away from the test vehicle. What's going to happen now is we're going to have the investigators go in and look at the physical evidence that's on the roadway just like they would at a regular crash scene and walk through it. They'll come in, they'll look at the physical evidence and try and establish what they have to document. They have to identify the physical evidence before they can document it and then interpret it. Ideally, they don't like to talk too much to the investigators because we want the evidence to tell us what happened. So what they're doing right now is the investigators are looking at the surface. They're identifying some of the gouges and the contact points along the road. They may be able to tell what part of the car made that contact point from looking at the car, but in the end, they're identifying all their physical evidence. You'll see that in this case, while they've already got the evidence identified, they've got a photographer that's already taken the pictures, and they're marking the evidence on the roadway. As they're going through, they're identifying what it is they want to capture as an investigative team, and then they'll move forward to mark it with numbered cones. When they get to a crash scene, normally the highway is well worn. We don't see crashes happening in the same spot every day. So one of the things that the investigators will look for is when they come to a gouge mark or a scrape mark, they'll look at to see how recent it is. And one of the things they're going to look at is in the leading edge of the mark, they may find it's very sharp. The stones and the pebbles in the mark are going to be loose. They're also looking at a lead in and lead out. The lead in of the mark and how it leads out. You can see here that we have some white marks in the asphalt indicating that these marks are fairly recent. So what they'll do is they'll walk through their scene, they'll look for tire marks. Here we have the tire contact scuff, and so we know that the tires were in contact with the roadway at this point, and so they'll mark it all in the crash scene. Now if we had a scene, for example, where we had one over top of the other, the fact that they've marked their scene makes it easier for them the next day. Once they've got their scene marked and they've got their initial photographs taken, they'll come back with cones and they'll mark the scene with cones so that if they go to court and they want to refer to the physical evidence in the scene, they're able to come back and document or refer to a specific cone number. We've got one of our investigators that's taken notes on what each of the cones is saying or what it represents, and as they're going through, he will have the notes as to what cone number 9, for example, liquid debris on the roadway, what that signifies to the crash and where it is. And then once they survey those points, his notes and the surveyed notes will correlate. As we walk through the scene, you can see the investigators are looking at what evidence might be related to the crash. They're looking at marks that are on the roadway now and suggesting that some of this evidence may be from a crash that they had yesterday, so they're eliminating it. But they're also looking at what relevance the ones that they have marked have to that vehicle and how that evidence might come together. There's more evidence than just the road surface evidence that shows up in a crash scene. In this case, they're looking at vehicle debris evidence. They've got taillight lenses, red taillight lenses and whatnot that they're looking at. In a real crash, we may also find glass from the different windows deposited on the roadway in a certain pattern or in a certain area, which might indicate to us the position of the vehicle was on the highway when it landed. So as they walk through and they document their physical evidence, they're looking for anything that might help them with the trajectory of the vehicle or the dynamics of the vehicle as it went through this rollover sequence. Quite often in these crashes, as you saw in the rollover crashes, we lose vehicle components. The hood in this case has been ripped off the vehicle. And for investigators, for the collision reconstructionist, he comes to the scene and he finds the vehicle in this configuration or in this position on the roadway with no idea of how that hood came off. This testing is providing us the opportunity to see at what point that hood may have come off and what it did before it came to rest on the roadway there, and whether it has any correlation for the speed of the vehicle. So those are all things that we're going to look at to find out how it relates to the actual crash and whether there was any common denominator in all these crashes we're doing here over the 5 days.
The crash, it happens in an instant, but the disentanglement does take some time. Depending on the nature of the crash, depending on the damage to the vehicle, extrication can take anywhere up to 15 to 30 minutes to be complete. Once the patient is out, the rescue crew still stays around, cleans up any fuel or oil leaks that have taken place, and help with the tow truck to clean up any debris that's spread about. So you can typically look at from the time the crew rolls up on scene till they're done is probably a good hour, depending on, again, on the crash scene, the situation. If it's down an embankment, if it's into a bunch of trees, time is always of the essence, but it does take time to get this kind of stuff underway. We won't play the odds on that type of thing. If there's any doubt, any MVA that involves a rollover, yeah, the patients are coming out with spinal precautions.
In this case, we had vehicle occupants in the vehicle. You can see that we have a crash dummy that's been fabricated from fire hose in the vehicle. We're also looking at the various types of vehicle evidence that we have on the car itself. We have the outer flange of the rim and the inner flange of the rim that have come into contact. There's gouging and scraping on it. We have the tire, the circumference of the tire that has got striations and contact mark in it, indicating that this is where the tire contacted the roadway and caused it to flip. You'll see that we have a similar contact mark on the rear outside flange and the tire area again here, and this is the side that came down into the asphalt first. Once the vehicle started to roll, you're starting to see that on its roof, the damage looks very similar to the vehicles that we saw that had already been involved in the crashes. Again, when we look at the dynamics of the roll, how this vehicle went through this crash sequence, we'll be able to see whether or not there's more damage or less damage the more times it rolls, or whether a vehicle that only rolls a small number of times creates a lot of damage in the initial stages. Those are all things we'll look at. On occasion that we arrive at the crash scene and we find that there may be a deceased in the vehicle, that person becomes evidence in the crash, and we're interested in how they're laying, where they're laying, and what injuries they may have. So in most cases, that evidence has to be preserved, and the coroner is the one who decides when the deceased is going to be moved from a vehicle. So we have to protect this evidence, and often the vehicle is covered, and we wait for instructions from the coroner on what they wish to do under these circumstances, whether they're coming to the scene or whether we can go ahead and extricate a person from the vehicle. Once we start to extricate, one of the things that our investigators will want to look at is how we're extricating, what their position is in the vehicle, how we should remove them so we don't destroy any evidence that may be on the body itself. So then we work with the fire department in making sure that the extrication is done in a manner that doesn't destroy any evidence. So everything pertaining to this vehicle becomes evidence and becomes important in the overall reconstruction of the car crash. Often we come into a crash scene and when we see things that might indicate that this vehicle had a problem before the crash. One of the things that our investigators want to do is find out if a vehicle defect might have been responsible for the crash itself. So in this case, we've got the tie rod end and the components in the left front wheel have been pulled apart, and this wheel is free moving. Someone with little experience might think that this tire or this steering component failed, and that caused the car to flip and roll. What you have to keep in mind is one of the jobs of the collision reconstructionist is to determine if this tire or this steering component failed before the crash, during the crash, or after the crash, when it was pulled apart. So it's important that when the investigators get here that they look at all the physical evidence on the vehicle and determine whether or not it was also a mechanical defect that might have led to the crash. One of the key components here this week is we have our counterparts of the fire department here, and they're watching our investigators as they walk through the scene and what they're looking for on the highway, because you have to remember that when they arrive on the scene, the first priority is to preserve life. So they're coming in to remove people from the vehicle, to deal with people who are injured, and for them here today, they're looking at what the collision reconstructionist is looking for when he gets to the scene, what evidence they may be able to help us preserve, or what they may be able to help provide to us in terms of evidence that they may be interested in as investigators. So all in all, it becomes a partnership of collecting the evidence, preserving the evidence, and allowing our investigators to get as much as they can out of this crash scene, because once we move this, it's never going to be the same. We have one opportunity to capture all this evidence, and that's now. The importance here is to understand that the only time that it becomes an issue for us with another agency is more after we have the injured that have been taken off to the hospital. We want to make sure that nobody starts destroying scene evidence. We understand what they have to do, and for the most part, we let them do what they have to do because it's important. I mean, let's face it, the priority here is to preserve life and to treat the injured. So if they have to tear this car apart to get the injured out and get them off to the hospital, then that's the priority. What these guys need to know is that as the fire department's working, their job is going to be to document as much of this crash scene as they can while the fire department are doing their work. And that way they don't lose their evidence. So together we're able to say, this is what the fire department is going to do next. We should document this before they get too far. A lot of these guys take their cameras out early and start walking to the scene with a camera. One might say, well, why is a policeman taking pictures and he's not helping the injured? Well, the fire department are helping the injured with the ambulance. Our job is to document the scene, get the forensic evidence we need so that we can go back and possibly tell a family what happened in detail so that they can understand how the crash occurred. So in this test here, we have crashes that occur on the highway where a vehicle rolls down the highway itself, but in many cases the vehicle rolls off the highway into the ditch or into a field. So what this test is going to simulate is a crash where the vehicle comes off the highway, starts rolling down into the dirt or the moss, and flips and rolls. And what we're looking for here is what the deceleration value is going to be on the grass versus the asphalt, and whether we're going to see anything different. So our car is coming down. He's going to try and deposit the car just before he goes off the end of the runway. What we have to keep in mind is each rollover is going to be different. Sometimes we have vehicles that roll 5 or 6 times. We've had them roll as high as 8 times. And others may slide, like in this case, slide on its roof and roll once. Each one of those has to be analyzed to find out what the deceleration factor was applied to that car. In this case, it came up on its wheels, and the wheels dug into the moss. All of that is taken into consideration, keeping in mind that no 2 crashes are ever identical, and no two crashes ever produce the same evidence. So we analyze it all in each case to ensure we have a full complement of data to analyze in the end.
they remove the B post, it's called, so that way they can lay that back seat, the front seat, sorry, that the patient's leaning against right now. What they'll end up doing is they'll lay that right down, and that way they can slide a spine board in and take him out of the car without doing any compromise to his spinal. So what that medic is doing in the back, so right now they're holding C-spine, so they're holding his neck from moving. So they're handing that off to another one so that medic in the back can reposition himself to get him out of the way. The firefighter closest to us here, he's, like I said, he's holding the spinal, he's holding that neck so it doesn't move. And now they're handing it off, and it's actually a very specialized technique to get that done properly without causing any more damage or without compromising his spinal. We won't play the odds on that type of thing. If there's any doubt, any MVA that involves a rollover, yeah, the patients are coming out with spinal percussion. So there, what they did was they slid that spine board down, and now they laid the back of the seat down, and it gets it a little better angle, plus it won't compromise the patient's back if there's any issues with his back, if it's broke, or if there's any even on the hips, if there's any damage to his hips. It's going to eliminate a lot of pain and a lot of issues in pertaining to that. And then it's just a matter of teamwork, sliding him up on the board, maintaining that C-spine control. Using our own guys, he's going to come back with feedback on the guys that were holding C-spine, and he's going to tell them how they did. If he had any neck or head movement, he's going to be the first one to feel it, and he's going to be the first one to say something to the guys. So it's a constant work in progress, a constant trying to make things better.
Very impressed with what's going on here. The support from the community is outstanding, and we could not have put a project like this on without them. And this is the first one I've been involved in, and can't say anything but that I'm more impressed than I thought I'd be. In.
The question's been raised as to why we would do this testing in Terrace. Terrace has stepped up to the plate in a lot of ways. We have 2 collision reconstructionists and a collision analyst here in Terrace that have said that they wanted to do the testing. They were interested in the results. When they started to look into what it would take to do this testing, they approached one of the local manufacturing outfits to see what we would need to build a table. They had to look at a venue. So in doing so, they quickly learned that the community was behind them and was prepared to help them out with this project. Skeena Valley Fabricating gave us the hours to build the table and charged the cost of the materials. They were very much involved in the development of the table and how it would work, what it would be required to get the result that we wanted out of it. We had the Terrace Airport here that provided us with a decommissioned runway to do the testing with certain stipulations with respect to the vehicle debris. We have Lake Isle Air, who provided the project with a helicopter to do some of the aerial photographs. CFTK Television, who comes out and has provided us with the ability to document through the different media this project so that we can have it later to examine and be able to analyze what the actual project was all about and deliver it to other police departments, because we do expect that to happen. So we've got businesses in Terrace who have come forward and said, yeah, we'll help, and they've volunteered their time and they've volunteered materials, and that's made this project that would normally cost in the vicinity of $1 million to do. We're able to do it here in Terrace for 1% of that, and on top of bringing all our collision reconstructionists from across Canada into Terrace to do it. So why Terrace? Because Terrace is not only Hockeyville, but it's a community that cares and stepped forward to help us out.
I'm lucky here in Terrace. When I go into a business and I tell them what we're doing, and I tell them that we're trying to collect data to make the roads safer for everybody, The people in Terrace are absolutely phenomenal, and on camera, I really want to say thank you to everybody, because without this support, this project, and what we're doing here would never have happened.
I'm very impressed with what's going on here. The support from the community is outstanding, and we could not have put a project like this on without them. And you know, this is the first one I've been involved in, and can't say anything but that I'm more impressed than I thought I'd be. And
it's another example of the emergency services in our region working together and being able to facilitate a practice or scenario like this, and for us also to be able to take part in it. It's excellent.
This is an ideal model. This has worked so well that it'd be pretty tough for any other community to work to this level.
In the future, we'd like to see, I'd like to see more training, more testing, and I think our partners with the Society of Automotive Engineers have a very keen interest in what we're doing here today, and we're hoping that we can take it to the next step in the future and provide an even more enhanced testing project.